You know, people own guns, and people certainly own guns in Canada, but nowhere near to the degree and nowhere near to the cultural relevancy
Yeah.
of gun. Like it's so baked into the American identity almost.
Let's speak to him now. Simu Liu, good morning to you.
Hey Stig, it's so lovely to be here.
It's great to have you here. Let's talk about the book before we talk about the movies. It's a love letter to your parents, in a way. Why did you want to write it? What are you trying to say to them and to people at large?
Well, I think to my parents, I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for all that you have worked for, all that you have sacrificed in coming to a new country, in choosing to risk everything in order to build a new life in a new place where, their next generation, i.e. me, could have every opportunity to pursue my dreams, because that certainly wasn't the case for them growing up in China in the 60s and 70s for a variety of different reasons. And also to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I was such a a rebellious kid growing up, and I'm sorry that we clashed as much as we did. Of course, listeners who grew up in intergenerational, intercultural households will understand, right? When you have fundamentally different upbringings from your parents, different cultures, different languages, it's so often just things devolve, and it can be very difficult to relate to one another.
So your parents came from China to Canada.
That's right. Yeah.
So growing up, were you aware as you were growing up that you were growing up as a Chinese Canadian, and that's different to being a Chinese person like your parents?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. I mean, even in the languages that we spoke in the household, when I was about 7 years old, I learned enough English, and then one day I just, instead of speaking Mandarin at home, I spoke English, and never, for some reason, never switched back. And so we had this like weirdly bilingual household where I would, my parents would speak to me in Mandarin, and I would only respond in English. And so that dynamic was ever present in our lives. And then, it only was exacerbated as I got older, because, I went through puberty. I wanted very different things than what my parents wanted at that age. And so they just couldn't fathom how it was that they could have a child like me, because, they wanted me, of course, to very much to follow in their footsteps. And they were electrical engineers, so that clearly didn't happen.
And is there a tension there? Because we talk quite a lot about this on this program, that with immigrant parents, they have a very clear idea often what they want their children to become.
Sure.
And that can lead to the children following their parents' wishes, but it can lead to the opposite in a way. It can lead to the children going, you know what, that's the last thing I'm going to do. I'm going to head off and do something else.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think so much of our parents' expectations of us are based on their experiences. And so for my parents, who are academic, geniuses who succeeded, and were able to leave the country because of an academic opportunity, of course, it's not difficult to see why that, their entire determined, definition of success would be predicated around this idea of academic achievement, right? So knowing full well that that's, what their point of view was, that's why they feel the way that they feel, I still unfortunately was not able to give that to them. I wish I honestly wish that I would have been, but I grew up very different. I was very artsy.
Did they presumably think at some point your artsiness is going to lead you to be very poor and unsuccessful? Because artsiness often do lead to that. At what point did you reach a point in your career, maybe it's being a star of a Marvel movie, where you can turn around and say, this was a good decision financially
sure.
as well?
Well, as most artists think in the time, even when they're struggling, is, I felt like I was doing important work. I felt like I was in a period of self-discovery, and that was tremendously meaningful for me. Of course, not as much to my parents. It took a little bit of time to get them on board. But I will say, I haven't reconciled with my parents because I became successful. That was a journey that I think we had started on prior to me booking the role of a lifetime. And thank goodness, right? Because if it had been like, you book Shang-Chi, and then the next day my parents are like, great, we love you now. I mean, that anybody would be cynical at that point.
Yeah.
But no, that's work that we'd been putting in for a very long time. And so I think we were able to fully celebrate in each other's success.
And how big a deal is it culturally, do you think, for Marvel, this giant franchise? And it feels at some point that almost every film that exists is a Marvel film. It dominates the pop culture now. And it strikes me that the thing about Marvel is, when you look at it, it has a social conscience. It always has done. And so that the dominant franchise in popular culture is keen to talk about people sharing and getting on, and people who are underdogs rising to the top. And that's never happened, I don't think, for the dominant pop cultural thing to have a social conscience. Did you feel that when you're working in it? Is that something why you want to be part of it?
I mean, absolutely. Well, there's so many reasons why I wanted to be a part of it. You know, least of all being I was a massive superhero fan. I just loved the genre. I watched every single superhero movie growing up, and then in the hands of someone like a Kevin Feige, who genuinely, I believe genuinely has just such an optimistic view of the world and believes that in the power of the movies and believes in the effect that it has not only on adults like you and I, but really profoundly on the children that are watching that 10 years from now will grow into adults and will have internalized their entire worldview based on these movies. No, I absolutely believe in their power, and it's very it's not hard to imagine too, being an actor taking up this mantle, to then think inwardly and to say, well, what am I doing with this platform? And that's largely, where the book came from as well.
And what do you make of America? Because your family comes from China, you live in Canada. We've just been talking about gun control and how if you're Canadian, it's baffling. If you're British, it's baffling.
Absolutely.
Are you encouraged not to think about these things? If you're part of a big studio, do they say to you, whatever you do, don't talk about guns? Because if you say that now, I won't ask another question. But is there a pressure on you to
talk about guns? I want to talk about guns. I want to talk about how easy it is to buy a gun in America now, as it always has been. I mean, it is baffling for those of us in the I feel like the rest of the world, but like we're in Commonwealth countries, and it's not like we grew up in a place where guns were completely outlawed. People own guns, and people certainly own guns in Canada, but nowhere near to the degree and nowhere near to the cultural relevancy
Yeah.
of gun. Like, it's so baked into the American identity almost. No, I want to talk about that because I'm very upset about what's happened. And
Do you think it would change? Someone once said that after Sandy Hook, when nothing changed,
Sure.
gun law conversation in America is gone. Because if
Sure.
you can't change after, we were looking at the 19 primary school kids, and we just had the dad. You heard it, but the dad who was a medical a responder, and he's looking after a girl who's covered in blood.
Yeah.
He says, whose blood is this? And she names his daughter, and that's how he learns that his daughter has been killed at school. And you just hear his whole world just collapse in on himself as he's trying to tell the story.
My God.
But if we can hear that stuff and it doesn't not change, then maybe there's no debates in America.
I hate to take such a pessimistic viewpoint, although I hear that frustration. I really and I feel that not only in this conversation but in conversations that I've shared with American friends. The one thing that gives me hope is and I've said this before, but I truly do feel like our young adults today are more socially conscious than they ever have been. They're more outspoken than they ever have been, and they're aware, and they're able to use not just social media as a platform, but they're, I think, more equipped to use their voices. And that gives me a lot of optimism because truly it's the young people that will shape the world of tomorrow. And I may be hoping against hope at this point, but that things will change.
And just finally, you're now in the Marvel universe. Does this mean you make 10 movies now for the next 10 years? How locked into it are you?
I mean, I'm in. This has been a role of a lifetime, I think we have a plan to make a second one relatively soon.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I think there's a sniper somewhere in that building across the street that's, very, very ready to prevent me from spoiling anything. But I'm very excited. Like these movies, as you said, they're really, an integral part of our cultural zeitgeist, and I do believe in the power that it has to shape the world, hopefully for the better.
Well, listen, well done to you. Great success. Well done on the book, and good luck with it all.
Cheers. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. That is Simu Liu there.